You're not behind, you're just tired. Hi, welcome back. There's a sentence people repeat to themselves quietly, usually late at night, usually without fully believing it. I'm behind. Behind where I should be, behind where other people are, behind the version of myself I thought I'd be by now. And what's interesting is that people say this regardless of age. Kids feel behind socially, teenagers feel behind emotionally, adults feel behind financially, older adults feel behind existentially, which should already tell us something important. If everyone at every stage of life feels behind, then behind probably isn't a real place. It's a sensation, and sensations usually come from the body before they become thoughts. We live inside cultural timelines that pretend to be neutral but aren't. They look like guidelines. Graduate by this age, stabilize by this age, partner by this age, earn by this age, heal by this age, figure yourself out by this age. And they function more like background pressure. You don't actively agree to them, you absorb them. And then one day you wake up tired. Not confused, not lost, just tired. And your brain looks for a reason, so it picks the nearest available explanation. I must be behind. Here's the first reframing, and it's a big one. Most people who feel behind are not unmotivated, they're neurologically exhausted. Fatigue changes perception. When you're rested, time feels spacious. When you're tired, time feels accusatory. Everything starts to feel late, urgent, and past due. Not because it is, but because your system doesn't have the energy to hold complexity anymore, so it collapses everything into one blunt conclusion: I'm behind. Kids understand this instinctively. When a kid is tired, they don't say, my executive functioning is compromised. They say, this is too hard. I can't do it. It's not fair. They're not wrong. They're reporting capacity. Adults do the same thing, just with more shame and bigger words. Let's talk about progress, because this is where things really break down. Progress has been flattened into visibility. If it's not obvious, it doesn't count. If it's not measurable, it's dismissed. If it's not linear, it's suspicious. But real progress is often internal, non-linear, and invisible until it's done. Learning how to regulate your nervous system doesn't look impressive. Unlearning survival patterns doesn't photograph well. Recovering from years of pressure doesn't come with milestones. So people assume nothing is happening, but something's happening. And it's just happening at a layer culture doesn't track. There's a massive misunderstanding about rest. Rest is treated like a reward for progress. First you do enough, then you earn rest. But biologically, it's the opposite. Rest is what allows progress to consolidate. Without it, effort just circulates stress, which is why so many people are doing everything right but still feel like they're failing. They're not failing, they're running a depleted system on borrowed energy. Here's something subtle but important. A tired nervous system confuses lack of output with lack of worth, but where the pain really comes from, that's where the pain really comes from. Not I haven't done enough, but what does that say about me? This is where people try to start fixing themselves. New routines, new identities, new productivity systems, new explanations for why they're broken. But tired systems don't need fixing, they need relief. Let's pause on the idea of timelines for a second. Timelines assume stable conditions, predictable support, consistent health, uninterrupted development. Most people have had none of these. So comparing yourself to a timeline that assumes ideal conditions is like comparing your walking speed to someone on a moving sidewalk. Of course it feels like you're behind. The context is different. Redefining progress doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means changing the unit of measurement. Instead of how much did I accomplish, you might ask, how much strain did I reduce? How much clarity did I gain? How much capacity did I preserve? Those are not small things. They're foundational. And they compound quietly. Here's something I want everyone to understand. Being tired doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've been carrying something for a long time. Sometimes the bravest thing a system does is slow down before it breaks. But culture doesn't clap for that, so people feel ashamed instead of proud. If this episode does one thing, I wanted to interrupt the reflex to self-blame, not by replacing it with positivity, not by saying everything's fine, but by offering a more accurate explanation. You're not behind, you're just tired, and tired systems see the world differently. One of the strangest things about fatigue is how convincing it is. When you're tired, your thoughts don't feel foggy, they feel true. They feel realistic, responsible, and even wise. You start thinking things like, I need to catch up. I should be further along by now. Once I get my life together, then I can rest. None of those sound irrational, they sound mature, but they were being generated by something that's already overextended. Here's something most people don't realize. Fatigue distorts your relationship with time. When your nervous system is depleted, it loses its ability to hold the present moment comfortably. So it starts scanning. It starts scanning backwards, like what should I have done already, or forwards, or both. Like what am I about to fall behind on? That scanning feels like responsibility, but it's actually a stress response. A rested system can stay here. A tired system is always somewhere else. This is why rest doesn't feel productive at first. When you finally stop pushing, all the unprocessed pressure rises to the surface. Your thoughts get louder, your emotions feel heavier, time suddenly feels slow. So people conclude, rest makes me feel worse, but it doesn't. It just removes the distraction of urgency. So let's talk about catching up, because this concept quietly harms people. Catching up assumes there's a correct pace. You deviated from it and now you have to compensate. But life doesn't work like a conveyor belt. There's seasons where growth is intentional, where growth is internal. Seasons where survival is the work. Seasons where rest is what prevents long-term damage. You don't catch up from those seasons, you integrate them. If a kid trips and scrapes their knee, no one says, run faster to make up for lost time. No, they sit, they breathe, they recover. Somewhere along the way, people can learn that slowing down is failure, and tired people internalize that lesson the hardest. Another thing fatigue does is flatten memory. When you're exhausted, you forget how much you already navigated. You remember mistakes vividly, you remember gaps clearly, you forget resilience almost entirely. So your past looks emptier than it actually is. That's not honesty, that's neurological bias. There's also a quiet grief that lives underneath I'm behind. It's not about comparison, it's about expectation. People aren't grieving who others are. They're grieving the version of themselves they thought they'd have energy for. That matters, and that deserves gentleness, not discipline. So let's zoom out for a second. Modern life asks for constant decision-making, constant availability, constant self-monitoring, constant optimization. Even rest has become performative. When someone says they're tired, what they often mean is, I haven't had a moment where nothing is being demanded of me, even internally. That kind of fatigue doesn't resolve with sleep alone. It resolves with safety. Safety isn't the absence of responsibility, it's the absence of threat. A nervous system that doesn't feel chased down doesn't need to prove it's on time. This is why people often feel better, not when they get ahead, but when they feel allowed to be where they are. There's something deeply misleading about motivation culture. It frames exhaustion as a mindset problem, as if the right perspective could override biology. But bodies don't respond to slogans, they respond to conditions. There's no amount of reframing that makes a depleted system suddenly abundant. Here's a simple truth that I want to land gently. If you feel behind, ask first, what has my system been enduring, not what's wrong with me? That question alone shifts the entire internal conversation. What has my system been enduring? Progress that ignores capacity doesn't last. It looks impressive for a while, but then it collapses. Progress honors capacity. Progress that honors capacity looks slow until you realize it's stable, and stability compounds. There's a moment that happens after deep fatigue eases, and most people miss it because they rush past it. It's not motivation, it's not clarity, it's not confidence, it's neutrality. Things stop feeling urgent, but they also stop feeling dramatic. Your life doesn't suddenly make sense, it just stops feeling like an emergency. And that state is incredibly important because neutrality is where accurate perception returns. When you're exhausted, everything feels consequential. Every choice feels permanent, every delay feels dangerous, every comparison feels like evidence. But when your nervous system stabilizes, the volume drops. You start noticing what actually matters versus what's just noise, what drains you versus what challenges you, and what you want versus what you're reacting to. That's not laziness, that's orientation. This is why redefining enough is so powerful. Enough is not a finish line. It's a signal of sufficiency. When something is enough for you, your system can stop bracing. And when bracing stops, energy returns, not explosively, but steadily. Let's talk about rest for a second. Not sleep, not vacations, not self-care. Rest is anything that allows your system to stop self-monitoring. That can be like doing something without evaluating it, being somewhere without performing, thinking without fixing, and existing without improving. Rest is when your attention is no longer split, and split attention is one of the biggest drains people don't name. Most people don't feel tired because they're doing too much, they feel tired because nothing ever feels done. Even joy gets interrupted by, should I be doing something else right now? That question alone keeps your system activated. Here's a quiet reframe. Rest isn't time off from progress. Rest is where progress reorganizes itself. Your body and mind are constantly sorting information. Fatigue happens when input exceeds integration. Rest gives integration space. That's why insights often come in the shower, on walks, or while doing something repetitive. Not because you were trying, but because you stopped trying. This also explains why people often panic when they first slow down. Without motion, identity feels exposed. If you've been defining yourself by output, rest can feel like disappearance. When you're not disappearing. You're decoupling your worth from urgency. That's destabilizing at first, but then it becomes grounding. There's something else worth naming. A lot of people aren't behind in life. They're ahead of their nervous system's capacity. Their mind made plans faster than their body could sustain them. That's not failure, that's mismatch. And mismatch resolves with recalibration, not shame. Recalibration is gentle. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like fewer internal arguments, slower but more decisive action, less explaining, more pausing before reacting. From the outside, it might look like stagnation, but from the inside, it feels like relief. Let's talk about timelines again, because this is where people get stuck. Cultural timelines are linear. Human timelines are cyclical. Energy rises, energy falls, understanding deepens, identity shifts. If you measure a cycle with a line, it always is going to look like a delay. But cycles aren't inefficient, they're how systems stay alive. Children understand cycles intuitively. They learn, they rest, they play, they repeat. Adults are taught how to override rhythm. So exhaustion isn't personal, it's systemic. And recognizing that doesn't remove responsibility, it just removes self-blame. Here's something I want to offer gently. You don't need to figure out your life while you're tired. That's like trying to map out a city during an earthquake. Stability comes first, direction comes later. Clarity follows regulation, not the other way around. When fatigue lifts, people often say, I don't know what changed, I just feel more like myself. That's because you didn't lose yourself, you lost access to yourself. And access returns when the system feels safe enough to open. There's a reason discipline collapses when people are exhausted, and that's not because someone is weak or inconsistent, it's because Discipline is a top-down. There's a reason discipline collapses when people are exhausted, and it's not because they're weak or inconsistent. It's because discipline is a top-down strategy, and fatigue is a bottom-up signal. Discipline comes from the thinking mind, and fatigue comes from your body, and the body always wins eventually. Most cultural advice assumes a rested system. Just be consistent, just push through, just get back on track. But when your nervous system is depleted, those instructions feel like pressure, not guidance. Perception. It reduces creativity. It makes everything feel binary, succeed or fail. That's not a mindset problem, that's physiology. That's why exhausted people often feel like they've lost motivation. Motivation isn't gone, it's offline. Motivation only shows up when the system believes effort will be rewarded, not punished. Burnout teaches the body that effort equals danger, so the system resists. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Momentum does not come from force. Momentum comes from coherence. When your actions, capacity, and values align, movement happens naturally. And when they don't, even small tasks feel impossible. Think about how water moves. It doesn't push itself uphill. It follows gravity. It responds to structure. Your energy works the same way. If your life structure contradicts your capacity, no amount of willpower fixes that. So instead of asking, how do I become more disciplined? The more accurate question is, what would make movement feel safe again? Safe doesn't mean easy, it means non-punitive. Here's a subtle but important distinction. Growth that feels urgent usually isn't growth, it's a threat response. Real growth feels curious, it unfolds, and leaves room for adjustment. Urgency demands certainty. Growth tolerates ambiguity. That's why people who rest properly don't just feel better, they move differently. They stop overcommitting, they choose fewer things with more intention, and they recover faster from setbacks. And trust pauses without panic. From the outside, it can look slower, but it's actually more efficient. Efficiency isn't about speed, it's about wasted motion. Burnout creates frantic movement with little return. Rest restores your signal, so effort goes where it matters. Let's talk about forward movement without burnout. Forward doesn't mean harder, forward means truer. Ask, does this action require me to override myself? Does it expand me or contract me? Would I still choose this if I weren't trying to prove anything? Those aren't productivity questions, they're alignment questions. Alignment is the quiet engine of sustainable progress. Aligned action doesn't need hype, it doesn't need fear, it doesn't need constant reaffirmation. It feels obvious, almost boring. That's how you know it's real. There's another myth worth dismantling, that rest makes you complacent. In reality, rest removes false urgency, not genuine desire. When people stop bracing, they often discover what they actually want to move toward. Not what they're running from, not what they're pressured into, not what looked impressive, something simpler, more precise, more personal. This is where identity shifts happen, not through reinvention, through subtraction. You stop being the version that rushes, the version that apologizes for pauses, the version that confuses exhaustion with inadequacy. What's left isn't lazy, it's honest. And honesty creates a different kind of discipline. Not discipline as control, but discipline as care. Care says, I won't ask more of myself than what I can give today. Care is consistent without being rigid. It adapts, listens, and adjusts. That's how trust rebuilds internally. When self-trust returns, progress stops feeling fragile. You don't need to micromanage yourself. You don't need elaborate systems to keep going. You don't need constant reassurance. You move, you pause, you move again, like breathing. One last thing, and this matters, if you've tried for a long time, relief can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. Peace doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes it feels empty. Sometimes it feels quiet in a way that makes old fears audible. That doesn't mean something is wrong. That means you're finally hearing yourself again. There's a quiet question people don't ask enough. How will I know when I'm actually ready again? Not motivated, not inspired, not hyped, ready. Readiness doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself with energy drinks and grand plans. Readiness feels stable. When you're tired, desire feels urgent. When you're rested, desire feels patient. That's one of the cleanest signals. Urgency says, I need to fix something, or I need this to fix something. Readiness says, I want to engage. One is compensatory, the other is elective. A lot of people confuse rest with avoidance because they're used to operating under pressure. Pressure gave their lives shape, deadlines gave them identity, stress gave them momentum, but when the pressure lifts, it can feel like losing gravity. But here's the truth, most productivity culture never names. If the only thing moving you is fear, stopping doesn't mean you're broken. It means the fuel source changed. This is where people panic and say, I think I'm just lazy now. No, you're no longer externally propelled. And that's not a flaw, that's a transition. Think of it like this. Fear-based motion is like being pushed downhill. Choice-based motion is like walking on level ground. One is faster, but one is sustainable. Level ground feels slower at first, but it's because you're actually walking. So how can you tell the difference between resting because you need rest and resting because you're avoiding your life? The answer isn't guilt, it's signal. Avoidance feels foggy. Completion feels clear. Avoidance fragments attention. Completion restores attention. When rest is unfinished, your mind loops. You scroll, you distract, you feel vaguely uneasy. But when rest is complete, curiosity returns. Not pressure, curiosity. You start noticing things. You get small ideas without forcing them. You feel interest without obligation. That's readiness knocking. Another sign of real readiness is you stop fantasizing about dramatic change. Not, I'll reinvent my whole life in a week or a day. No, not everything needs to be completely different. Instead, you think, I could try this one small thing. It's not a lack of ambition, it's precision. Precision only emerges when your nervous system isn't flooded. Flooded systems think in extremes. Regulated systems think in increments, and increments compound. Let's talk about ambition, because it doesn't disappear when you soften, it changes texture. Old ambition says, how far can I go? New ambition says, how well can I live while going? That question alters everything. This is where people who've truly rested become dangerous in a quiet way. They're not frantic, they're not reactive, they don't chase validation, they choose. They move without explaining themselves, they stop needing permission. That's power without performance. Re-entering ambition gently means letting capacity lead. Instead of asking, what should I be doing? You can ask, what can I sustain without resentment? Resentment is the early warning system. Listen to it. So here's a grounded truth that a lot of people understand intuitively, but can forget later on. If something hurts every time you do it, you don't do it better. You do it differently. You adjust, not override. Wisdom is remembering how to adjust again. Progress that honors capacity doesn't look impressive at first. It looks like fewer promises, slower mornings, clearer no's, consistent yeses. It looks boring to people who perform exhaustion, but it feels rich on the inside. And richness changes how time feels. When you're tired, time feels like it's running out. But when you're regulated, time feels available. That alone tells you you're not behind. You were just racing while depleted. Let's land this with something simple and true. You don't need to catch up to a life you never consented to rush through. There's no universal pace. There's no moral speed, no correct timeline, only a body and a mind, and a life asking to be lived in sync with both of them. If you remember nothing else from this episode, let it be this. Rest is not a detour from your path. It's how you find the part of the path that's actually yours. Not the loud one, not the admired one, not the urgent one, the true one. Love you. Talk to you soon.